Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. So let me start the recording. Okay, record. So just a quick heads up, a recording has already been started, and we place our recordings on our YouTube channel. If you don't want to be recorded, you may want to drop off now. And once again, welcome to another session of Azure Power Lunch. Today, we are going to be talking about some of the Azure Container Apps updates, and specifically, basically, there are two. And as usual, here is a quick agenda. We are going to do a quick lap around container apps just to do a level set, what they are, just a quick summary, a few minutes. And then we are going to go into Azure Container App private endpoint support, some of the feature which have just gone into public preview. Okay, so that's that. So what are Azure Container Apps? Azure Container Apps is Microsoft's a serverless platform for running container-based application without worrying about the without caring about the infrastructure and and its maintenance. So basically, you don't have to have this, create an AKS cluster or anything. You can just bring in your container and run it as Azure Container Apps. Folks, if you don't mind, can you please mute your phone? And if folks, if you don't mind, if anybody is waiting in the lobby, please let them in. If I don't do it in a timely fashion. Okay, so what are common use cases for these container apps? The common use cases include like if you are deploying an API, you're on a host an API in the cloud, and just keep in mind there are multiple ways that you can have container in Azure. You have app service, you have ACI, you can run containers on AKS, of course, container-based application, but that's one of the other option. Oh, that's why sorry guys. Let me know if you can see the slides. Sorry guys. I really apologize. I did not share the slide deck. Okay, so once again, going back, um, we are talking about Azure Container App updates, specifically the private link, private endpoint support. And what are container apps? Container apps is an Azure service which allows you to run container-based application in cloud without worrying about the underlying infrastructure. You don't have to create an AKS cluster or anything. You can just bring your container and run it. And it's one of the ways you can run containers in Azure. Okay. There are multiple ways, and this just gives you the flexibility. You can expose APIs. The use cases include like if you want to create APIs or in Azure container-based API application, you are running some sort of a batch process, you're running some sort of a recurring apps, things like that. And by the way, these ACA supports both TCP-based application and application that are more of a runs like a batch process or jobs, things like that. Okay, and just keep in mind that you can scale them. So you can scale them based on HTTP traffic, based on the usual suspects like memory, CPU, based on CADA, which is Kubernetes event-driven architecture. So these are the things that you can do with um, Azure Container Apps. Quickly, what is an Azure Container App environment? Azure Container App environment is a logical isolation where um, secure logical isolation where your container apps run. And there are two types of environment. When we started, there was a consumption-based environment where you can run consumption-based app. Basically, you run the app and they run in that particular environment. But enterprises need more flexibility, they need more control. That's where workload profile comes into picture, which allows you to run both consumption based application as well as application that are running in a dedicated environment where you can pick the underlying infrastructure. So both of these things are in your control. And you can run it in the Microsoft given virtual network where you have limited control, or you can bring your own VNet. So you can bring your own VNet and run it in that. So that's flexibility is there as well. And finally, you can have multiple container apps in a single environment. Okay, let's move forward.
Yeah, pode falar assim, cara, ele pode ir no bar. Não sei como não. Seria não para isso,
So here are the two container apps environment. One is the workload profile and the consumption profile, consumption only. Workload profile, as I mentioned before, supports both consumption and dedicated. And that's what we are going to be talking about today. That's the way most enterprises are using those. And once we talk about dedicated, we are talking about a fixed cost plan, a fixed cost infrastructure that is where you are picking up the underlying infrastructure. Consumption is just consumption, just like you have with the consumption of environment. Okay. Any questions so far? Okay, so let's quickly move forward. Um, So what is the private endpoint support that we are going to be talking about today? So now what you can do is you have an Azure Container Apps, you can make it private only. So basically there is nobody that can access it externally. Either it can be accessed from the environment or the virtual network that it is deployed. Just keep in mind you may have multiple um, apps deployed in the same multiple app environments may be deployed in the same VNet. So if you say VNet, then they can talk to each other. If you say ACA environment, that only the apps in the environment will be able to talk to each other. Okay. So you may have an app that is, let's say that you have multiple apps. One app is a front end app that is exposing an API. Then there is an app that is doing some business logic. And you don't want the app that is running business logic being called outside the environment. So you just make it environment specific. Okay. In any case, when we go up to when we are talking about private endpoint, what's happening is that it creates a private link resource in the um, Azure Container Apps environment. And just keep in mind, it's an environment specific resource. So you can access any app that is there in the environment through that private endpoint. Okay. So you create the private endpoint, and then you can, just like any other private endpoint, you drop into the subnet, and then you can access it from that same private endpoint, just like you can access any other service. Okay, that's one thing. Second part is, which is a great news, that now you can expose these things, ACA apps, through Azure Front Door. So Azure Front Door supports connecting to backend services over public internet. That's always there, but it supports certain services, connection to certain services over private endpoint, and that is app service and that is function. And now Azure Container Apps is one of that service where you can connect to it. So basically, you have a front door instance, and you want to expose your container app through front door over private endpoint. Now that support is available. It's in public preview though. Just keep that in mind. Okay. And another thing I want to mention, that support is not available through portal. It's only through CLI. I have provided the links in the end for both. And we can then take a look at that. So let's quickly jump into the demo. Any questions so far, folks? You see the chat window. And folks, I really apologize in the beginning for not sharing the presentation. Uh, so hopefully everybody is good now. Okay, so first of all, I have this, and I'm gonna show you just for a second process of you know creating the ACA. So I'm gonna do a container app just to show you that what are different options that are available and in terms of networking and all. So I go in here and I'm gonna do a container app, create, and we are not gonna actually create a container app. Let me move this thing aside. Okay, so you basically provide the name of the container app resource group. We're gonna call it. So you just give it a name, and anyways, we are gonna not exactly create it. I just want to show you. So this is what I'm talking about: container app environment. If we say create new, okay, if we say create new, it will ask you the name of the environment, and we can just call it test 01, and then it will ask you what is the workload profile, and that's where you can add a workload profile. So this is what I'm referring to, dedicated. So you can choose a size. So these are there will be a list of SKU that is available, and you can pick and choose one of those SKUs to be used. And there are GPU based SKUs available as well for your Azure Container Apps. Hopefully everybody is on now on the same page with workload profiles and how we are doing this thing. So I already have a Azure Container App that is created. And let's go and first of all, let's go and take a look at the Azure Container App environment. So once you create the Azure Container App, it creates an Azure Container App environment with it. This is the Azure Container App environment, and you can see here all different type of things. And it's gonna show you the app once it's for some reason whenever you're giving a demo, things tends to slow down. But let's give it a second. While we are waiting, just want to give a heads up that we won't be having session for the next few weeks because of the holidays in the US. So we will start back on, I think, 16th of January, the Friday in January. So you can go to the site and take a look when we will be starting back. And so there are three applications here with this environment. And uh, these are the workload profiles. I have two profiles in this environment. One and yes, just keep in mind you can have multiple profile. You have consumption and you have a dedicated profile. Look, this is my dedicated profile. And if I go in here, I have one app in running in consumption. Oh, sorry, two app running in consumption, one in workload profile. That's that. And now let's come to the networking side of it. Okay. So this is the heart of it. As you can see, I do not have any public access enabled. So you cannot access this. And by the way, um, if you're once you create an environment, you cannot change these settings, it seems like. Okay. And this is the subnet. So basically, this is the name of the VNet, and this is the name of the subnet where this uh, environment is deployed. And let me show you, I'm going to switch screen. I'm going to show you the subnet where it is deployed. And you will see one thing there in the subnet that it is dedicated. It's that subnet is delegated to contain Microsoft apps dot environment. So this is basically, it will be delegated. You cannot deploy anything else in that. That's that. Okay. Let's come back here. And then you have private endpoints. There are two private endpoints, and let's take a look at those. And this is I am going to talk about the second one. Okay. So this is the private endpoint that we are referring to. And let's take a look at one second, guys, sorry. Let's take a look at the private endpoint, and let's take a look at the experience of creating a private endpoint. Put simply, I mean, you can go express or advanced. Let's go advanced. And in that, you basically go in and wait a second for screen to refresh. Okay. So let's call it NZAPL is SCMEP. And this is the nickname, not Europe, whatever location you want to pick. And this is the important thing that you remember, that this is the resource and sub-resource type. This is the environment. So the sub-resource is environment, and then you will pick the virtual network. Okay. And basically, whatever your subnet is, you assign the subnet, and that's how you create the private endpoint. Okay. So I'm not going to create it because we already have the private endpoint. So I just want to show it to you. First of all, let's go into one of those service. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into there are the go into the overview and go on to one of these apps. Okay, so give it a second. This is the dedicated app that we are running. Okay. And if we go into this app, as you can see here, um, the ingress of this app, look at this. This is give it a second. Sorry, guys, it's taking some time to load. Okay, so this is the ingress. What I have done is let it refresh. I have enabled the ingress, and it is limited to the VNet. Remember, we talked about it's a container app environment, or the VNet is limited to the VNet. I have a VM deployed in the same VNet. Just keep in mind, you have to deploy a private DNS zone in that, okay? To make sure that the IP address can be resolved. So this is the private link that I have deployed, and this is um, the the record set. So, and you will see here how I am resolving the name. So if we go into the managed networking environment, it has a IP address. Um, I know I'm going from places to places, but just keep in mind the environment. This is the static private IP since it's non-public. If it's public, then you will have a public IP. Since it's private, it's a private IP. So this is the IP that's coming from the subnet. Second thing is that I have a private DNS zone which is mapping this IP to the um, to the name or to the FQDN of the environment. Okay, you will have to do that. Once you do that, then you will be able to access this app from any place inside that particular VNet. Okay, so bear with me here. I have this VM, this virtual machine that I have SSH'd into is inside the same VNet where this um, app is running. So I am going to call it. Wait a second. Okay, as you can see, it returns some response. Basically built in. This container returns, it's an API. It returns some weather data. You saw that weather data is here. Okay, so as we can see, now we can access it from inside a VM that is running in the same VNet where that ACA is running. Now let's talk about the private endpoint. So I have another VM that is in a different VNet, and I have created a private endpoint there. So let's go to that VM, and that's a Windows VM. I'm going to bring it up. This is the Windows VM. I have brought it up, and look, I can access it from there as well. Once again, same thing you have to do, and I can show it to you here. I have this private DNS zone as well. This is the let it come up. This is the private endpoint IP address, and I am creating the same, FQDN. Make sure that um, that record set is there. This is the name of my the FQDN part of my ACA environment, and that's you have to have it. So once you have it, now you can access it over a private endpoint. If I try to access this site, for example, that is here in this, if I go in here and I just copy this thing. Um, let me just make a copy and let me just paste it here in. It will not be able to access it. Actually, section fail because it's only accessible from a private endpoint. Okay, that part is done. Any questions? Okay, so now let's take a look at the front door. So I have created a front door profile. Just as I told you, you cannot create the profile using the portal. You have to use the CLI. I have shared the link. It's in preview, so you can do it from the CLI. So but just want to show you how it is connecting. So we go into the origin groups, and once we go there, we can go in here and configure origin group, and it will show you exactly, with front door, origin means where exactly the client application is. Okay, so this is the origin group. Okay, this is the name of the app. This is my app which I'm exposing it. Just keep in mind, with private endpoint you can access any app, but with front door you can actually give the host name, the app that you want to access. Okay, so this is the host name. If I click on it, this tells you origin container apps. This is the host name. This is the original host header, everything. Just keep in mind, since, yeah, we can see it, but look, enable private link service. It says the origin support does not support private link service. This is wrong, of course. That's why you cannot do it from the portal. You have to use it from the CLI itself. Okay, so that's that. So now through this, we can access this service, which is running in an ACA, Azure Container App, from front door. So what I'm going to do is, this is my front door URL, and I'm going to paste this URL here, and here we go. As you can see, I can access it. As you can see here, look, I can access the service that is exposed through an ACA, and that is not exposed publicly through a private endpoint from front door. So two things. Quick recap: Azure Container Apps, Microsoft service to run container-based application without worrying about the underlying infrastructure. Um, has two new features that are publicly available. One, the ability to create a private endpoint for the workload profile that is in public preview. You can create a private endpoint for a workload profile based Azure Container Apps. Second, you can expose a ACA, Azure Container App, through a private endpoint, so using a private endpoint through a front door profile. So you can do um, both of these things now. They are in public preview, and please go ahead and um, take a look. Any questions, folks?
Yeah, hi Naveed. I have few I pinged in the chat. So with the AKS, we get lot many features like sidecar implementation, ability to add persistent volumes, managing stateful
Absolutely.
services, and CSI based key vault integrations, all those types of things, right? So are any few of these supported by the container apps?
That's a very good question. Just keep in mind, AKS, think of it as a luxury car. Okay, it's all bells and whistles. I mean, side view, camera, this, that. Uh, Not everybody needs all these features. Okay, so if your container, I mean, if you just want to run, a number of customers, they just want to run a container app,
Mhm.
in the cloud, and they don't need sidecars, they don't need all these bells. You have Azure files, as far as I know, you can mount Azure files in ACA. So my point is, for those,
We have to
ACA may
still
be a
go with
good
the
fit.
AKS.
Yeah,
Okay.
but if you, I mean, once again, just keep in mind, many will, oh, this is a replacement for AKS. No, it is not. It's just to give you more flexibility. Because I have seen some customer, three apps, very simple apps, no, nothing, no fancy bells and
Complex.
whistles, and they are running AKS. And
Mhm.
AKS is very, very powerful, but it has, I mean, it takes lots to manage it as well. You
Yeah.
see, so for
Yeah.
that, ACA may be a good option, or app service may be a good option. Okay, so
Okay.
that's what my point is.
Okay. And regarding the pricing for the dedicated profiles, so usually we will have a base configuration and we'll have auto scale configurations, right? So when
Yes,
I start deploying a container, I might say I need two instances of this application running throughout the year. However, during the surge times, it may grow up to like 10 instances.
that is right. Yes,
So do I have to sign up for only the two instances that I plan to deploy and run throughout the year, and then only for the remaining
yeah.
scaled
Let me show you.
containers consumption
Actually,
based?
that's a very good question. Actually, where is my container manage environment workload profile? Let me show you what I have here. Come on. Here we go. Yes, you see here, I am going 3 to 5. So three in normally and 5 maximum. I
Mhm.
can go more, 30. Okay. So the thing is, I will pay only for what I'm using. So let's say that in the beginning, I'm using only three, but then as I scale up, I can go up to 30. But once again, you see, 12 core used, 188 still available. My point is, sorry, this is just the quota, I'm sorry. But this is like what is actual instances that are running. In the case of dedicated, I don't care how many apps are running. It's the current instances I'm going to be paying for.
Okay.
Got
So
it?
the yeah number of instances.
Yes.
Okay.
So basically, min is I always pay for that. Max is if like I'm scaling up, scaling up, scaling up because of the load. Yes, whatever instances that number is, then so it's a pro rate billing.
Okay.
Minimum, that's the minimum that you're always going to be paying. But then how you scale up, that decides how much you're going to pay.
Okay. Thank you, Navid.
Any other questions, folks? So basically, we are gonna be back in January on 16th. And this will be the last session of the year. So I hope everybody had a wonderful time off. You have taken any time off, and a happy new year, and hope to see everybody on January the 16th. Thank you very much, and hope everybody had a great rest of the day and great weekend.